Alrighty. We're gonna make sure. Starting and operating a business in every state. Million, I think over 1 million copies sold. Okay, here we go. Three, two. Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. You know, I love talking to authors because they have the courage to take their thoughts, their stories, their lessons, put it down in a book and share it with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And if you're an entrepreneur out there, I highly recommend you write a book because it gives you clarity, opportunities, it gives you self awareness. And that's why it'll change your life and hopefully your reader's life. If you need help with that, check out dreamstarterspublishing.com. We can help you out with wherever you're at in the process. But let's just say you have a book that's already done. You want to use it to generate leads for your business. Check out bookmarketingcrm.com. And as you know, if you're listening to this podcast, we talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. We talk to people who are building their businesses, and the insight, the stories behind them are very, very important. That's why we're having our next guest on. He wrote a book slash many books, at least 50, in regards to, are you ready for this? Starting and operating a business in every state. So there's one in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in Idaho, all of them. And it's, I believe, the national bestseller, over 1 million copies sold. So it is an honor to have the author with us, Mr. Mike Jenkins. Thank you so much for being here, sir. I really appreciate it. We figured out Zoom. We're here. We're ready to go. I appreciate your time, man.
Okay, great. Good to see you, Mike, and greetings from beautiful southern Utah here.
Okay, you're in Utah. I was just there not too long ago for an event. You have many books in regards to starting and operating a business in every state, basically. So let's start off with the genesis of that theme. What made you want to write that type of book? And if you can give us a quick little glimpse on where you come from and what you were able to accomplish, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, let me give you a little background. I'm definitely not your typical author. I didn't grow up planning to write books or write anything for that matter. And I basically just kind of fell into it. It kind of landed up on a silver platter. But that's not something I think that would happen to someone writing fiction. But for nonfiction, I think the lesson is if you're going to write nonfiction books like the series that I authored, it's really important to have the kind of background to do it. And that's basically why I fell into it. So, kind of going back to the start, I'm a graduate of Harvard Law School, graduated way back in the dark ages there, 1969. And came out of law school and didn't really want to practice law. But by that time, I was much more interested in finance. So I managed to finagle a job on the West Coast with a real good economics consulting firm run by a guy called Buzz Price, who was basically Disney's really close advisor who helped him locate both Disneyland and kind of ran that whole scheme where they bought up 27,000 acres of Orlando swamp for Disney World without anybody being the wiser. I mean, that was an incredible coup. So I went to work for him for a couple of years, did some really good work working with a bunch of MBAs and got that experience for a couple of years. At that point, I decided to, since I kind of liked accounting, to get into CPA work. So I managed to get a job with Pete Morowick, which at the time was the largest international accounting firm there in LA, and worked for them for about 5 years, which was fantastic experience, getting really learning tax law even more than I learned at Harvard. So that was a great background. And I eventually parlayed that into practicing law after being out of law school about 7 years. I kind of thought, maybe I should take the bar since I'm basically practicing law anyway. So I did that for about 4 years with a major law firm there in San Francisco and was doing real well with it. But the 80, 90, 100-hour weeks were just really destroying my health. So finally, I had my annual review at the firm, and this was in 1980. And they told me, one more year like this and you'll be partner, which would be like a record to do that in only 5 years. When they asked me what I thought Heller to do, I kind of thought about it a minute. And I said, well, I think I'm leaving in 30 days. That was kind of the genesis of the book. So on the very first day I was home, it was on a Monday, I'm out washing my car. My next door neighbor comes over and said, what on earth are you doing home on a weekday? I was like the ultimate workaholic. And I said, well, I'm taking the summer off. I'm going to go back into CPA practice in the fall, take the summer off. And he kind of thought for a second. He said, I'm just starting a little publishing company. All he had was like one little cookbook he and his wife had written. But he said, it's just a nightmare trying to get through all of the different requirements that California and the federal government, everything require. And he said, there's really no place to go, that kind of information. Of course, this was way before the internet. So he said, you'd be the perfect guy to write a book like that. And so I thought about it about 30 seconds. and I had to agree. I'd been generating all the kind of background that I needed to do this kind of book. So instead of taking my little sabbatical, I spent the summer doing a book for California.
This is 1980, am I right?
Yeah, this was 1980. And the thing I did that I think really had a lot to do with the effectiveness of the book, besides the fact I'd had a lot of really good training for writing. It seemed like everywhere I went with the economics firm, I was writing these long feasibility reports, and I had this great gal from New York who would just edit the hell out of everything I wrote. And so she was keeping me in line. And then both with Pete Marwick and with the law firm, I just happened to have partners that I reported to who I would write all these memos to them. And I was really good technically, so they would hardly ever have any questions on the technical part. But they were both just really fastidious and detail oriented about, no, you can shorten this this one long sentence down into three, and this kind of thing. So I was constantly getting that kind of reinforcement about writing clearly. So that came in really handy. But the other thing I did when I was writing that, I'd been doing a lot of personal development type things. And I would just kind of have this mantra running every time I would take on a new topic to start to explain it. And what I was saying to myself was, what is wanted and needed? What does my reader really want and need to know? They don't need to know how eloquent I am or anything like that. They need to know what are the critical facts. So I wrote it kind of in that spirit, and also worked in a good bit of humor, surprisingly, in that kind of book. And we started publishing it, and it was going reasonably well, although it was my publisher not having any real connections was struggling a little bit. We were storing all the books we printed in my garage. So I could kind of tell how well it was selling when he would come over with a wheelbarrow to get a few more books to ship. But finally, he hired a publicist and got me on a radio talk show in San Francisco. And at the time, there was a guy named Jim Eason, who was kind of the toast of the town. Everybody loved him. He was a talk show host. And back in those days, it wasn't political talk. It was just about everything. And apparently he really liked the book. So I got on there for about an hour. And he just kept touting the book. Every time he'd go to break, he was telling everybody, go out and buy this book. This is absolutely what you need. So as soon as the thing was over, I got home. My publisher was calling. He said, holy cow, he said, my phone has been ringing. All of these bookstore managers all over California were calling me. So it kind of took off from there. And within a couple of years, one of the other big 8 accounting firms, Ernst & Young, had started using it. They had a contract with the Small Business Administration. They were doing business startup seminars. And I found out they were using my California book. And by the time I had a Texas edition, and I said, oh boy, if they're going to do that, why don't I get them to do the state part for all these states? Because they had offices in almost every state. So I just went down to Dallas and talked to them and wound up negotiating a contract with them. So they wound up doing most of the work, and I wrote the contract, so I was getting most of the money. So,
Wow.
so it actually worked out really well. And eventually the sale just kept going. We got into Costco, and boy, if you can get your book into Costco, you are set because, well, fortunately, we were the only book besides the Thomas map guides that they kept year after year. Basically, they just turned over the books, but they would order mine or reorder every year, keep them in there. And they sold more books than all of the libraries in the entire country. I mean, libraries and bookstores. So Costco is really the name of the game if you can get in there.
Is it still
But
there?
no, no, no. Now we're getting to the bad part of the story. So by 1998, that was the first year we actually sold over 100,000 copies in one year. That year, we were just steadily going up. But I kept getting these signals from my publisher's accountant. He said, you know, they're planning to screw you over, and he wouldn't be more specific than that. So I didn't know what was going on. And it turns out that what was happening is he was selling more and more of my books, and my books were like 90% of his publishing company. He had a bunch of other books by that time, but he kept breaking even every year. He was selling more and more, kept breaking even. So what he did is, you know, he was paying me some serious royalties. So he decided to hire a bunch of young editors for like 20,000 a year, and had them basically clone the entire series under different titles. And he was, you know, he was real careful not to plagiarize. So one day I walk in a bookstore in Seattle where I was living at the time, and just walked over to make sure they had my book, because nearly every bookstore in the country carried my books, and I didn't see mine in the business section. And while looking, all of a sudden I saw a book that looked kind of like mine, and I picked it up and had my publisher's imprint on it, and that was when I knew I was really screwed. So that was kind of the end of my uh, print publishing career.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how it ends. And what it turned out to be, and we found out just a few months later, it turned out his accountant had been embezzling all of his profits for about 5 years, and didn't want to put him out of business, so he would just take enough that they would break even every year. And that's why he was, you know, so upset, because he was getting embezzled. So he replaced
Whatever
my.
happened to that accountant then? Are they still, or that publishing house? Is that still around?
No, what happened was the books he replaced mine with were terrible. That they're written by people that had no tax, legal background or business background to speak of. They were just these young kids out of college with English degrees. So they were relatively content free. And within about a year, you know, he had the channels, so they all went into Costco and everything in place of mine. But within about a year, they were coming back just in humongous numbers of returns. So that basically put him out of business.
Wow. Hey, that's karma
So,
right there. Am I right?
yeah. So I always said, kind of in one fell swoop, he stabbed me in the back and shot himself in the foot, because he had a nice thing going if he had just kept an
Kept it
eye on
going.
on his accountant. So it was kind of an unhappy ending to a long, very, very profitable career
Yeah,
as a
so people come to me and they ask me about traditional publishing as compared to self-publishing. And our philosophy, just because we work with so many people, is you got to self-publish to generate leads for your business, and you can grow your business you know, through different streams. What this sounds very much like traditional publishing, where you give your rights over to a publisher and they take it and they help you promote it and all that. But was it great for a while? Are you saying that it did take care of your lifestyle? It was your main source of income for many years?
Oh yeah. In fact, after about 5 years, once we got into Costco and we got all 50 states and DC done, I mean, I was making a nice six-figure income in the 1980s, which was pretty serious money back then.
Wow.
Uh, that was more than about twice what I'd been making as a lawyer with a really, really good firm.
Wow.
So,
So
so
your
it,
new
it
identity, you weren't a lawyer anymore. You were a best-selling author, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So one of my reasons for writing with the book was I never expected to be a big seller. I just thought, well, this would be great to use as an adjunct to my practice. So the CPA firm I went back and joined what was also helping promote it. And what we would do these big tax seminars for hundreds of lawyers and bankers and all, where I was a featured speaker and would sell the books in the back and the whole thing. But that turned out to be pretty trivial compared to getting into Costco and all of the bookstores, and every SBA office was using it as their standard reference all
Wow.
across the country. So it was a really good, like, 19 years, but
So
all good things come to an end.
this new identity of basically being the guy that you would go to for startup business advice, what were people coming to you for? Was it just the legal aspect? Was it the starting of the LLC, the S corps, insurance, or the structure, or just
Yeah,
laws and regulations? What did you notice?
yeah. From the feedback I got, and for a good while, we were including postcards where people could send us back their comments on it, on things they wanted, things they liked, things they didn't like about it, and which were overwhelmingly positive. But most of them seemed to really appreciate the tax and legal guidance in it, because I get into pretty deep into it. If you're making a lot of money, uh, you can obviously afford to pay tax lawyers and tax accountants. But what my book has always done is it makes a lot of the really interesting things you can do fairly simple and easy to understand, so that they're the kind of thing that say, hey, you mean I could do this? Let me go talk to my accountant and see if this will work for me. So it's that kind of thing, and just knowing about all of the different boxes you've got to check with, different state and federal laws, which are incredibly voluminous now. It gets worse all the time.
Yep,
So,
especially in California. That's
especially in California. In fact, I stopped updating my California book 3 years ago. It's just gotten insane.
I mean, being a lawyer, Harvard, and then getting into the entrepreneur space, I mean, you're talking about two totally different worlds, right? Many
Yeah,
wake up calls probably of like, wow, you're telling me that there was this in place here and not here. And obviously, entrepreneurship is what way more welcomed in Florida and Texas and certain areas, Utah. I
absolutely.
know Utah as compared to the New Yorks and
Yeah.
California. So, wake up call, am I right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the books give you a good overview too. If you are thinking about moving to another state, and you want to see what it's going to be like, you'll get a good idea. You'll find out, what all of the fees are and things like that. Now, in terms of your author audience, uh, my books are probably not terrifically relevant, but unless you're doing real well as an author, because for the most part, if you're an author and you're just selling a moderate number of books, you're not too worried about incorporating or setting up an LLC. Uh, in fact, I actively discourage authors from ever setting up a corporation, because there's a real severe trap you can run into with having no idea there's a trap. For example, if you put the rights to your book into a corporation and you think, hey, I want to be incorporated, and say your book starts to really take off, and for some reason down the road you decide, I don't need this corporation, and you take it out. Well, say if you're making 100,000 a year in royalties, uh, the IRS would look at that as a taxable liquidation, and they might say, well, that income stream is probably worth 600,000 or so. So you've got a $600,000 gain you need to pay tax on if you liquidate that corporation.
Wow.
Or if you just take the rights out, then it's a dividend. You don't even get a capital gain if you do that. So if you do want to have some kind of legal entity, I always say just set up an LLC, because it doesn't have any of those problems. Just if you want your business to be an LLC, which you might if you're doing things where you might get sued,
Yeah, of
it
course.
might be helpful. But if you're doing fiction, obviously you're not going to. Well, I say obviously, maybe you will if somebody accuses you of plagiarism or something.
Yeah, so the way I look at it, and this is something maybe, we never get into this much detail on these podcasts, but what I recommend to my clients that whenever they upload their book to KDP, most of our clients will just upload it to KDP and sell it directly there. Where does the money go? It goes into your bank account that's associated with your business. And I guess what you're saying is that way it's tied to your business. And if it's an LLC or an S corp, it's a very smart move. Is that right?
Well, an S corp could have the same problem if you ever removed the rights from the corporation or liquidated the corporation. That's a taxable event.
Got it. Okay.
Whereas with an LLC, particularly a single owner LLC, it's just like you say, okay, I want to dissolve it. It's dissolved, and there's no tax consequences at all.
And that is
So
only if you have extreme royalties, high royalties. Is that right?
yeah. That would be where you'd be concerned about it. But there's basically no real reason to incorporate. In fact, under the 2017 Tax Act, you know, people moan about the fact, oh, corporations aren't paying enough because their tax rate got cut to only 21%. But that's a flat tax now. So if you do have a corporation, you actually have to make a little bit over $90,000 of annual profit to actually pay less than you would have paid under the old system.
Yep.
So unless you're making big bucks, a corporation wouldn't even make sense for most people. But
So,
would also have that risk I just mentioned.
man, that's interesting. I could probably talk to you for hours on that because there's probably so many things you've seen because your book is done so well and you understand the game very well as an entrepreneur, as an author, but this is with royalties. So, my question to you is, I've noticed that there's definitely a game that's being played, and whenever I work with startup entrepreneurs, the first thing that you have to really focus on is your cash flow, right? Cash flow's got to be there to stay alive. And then
Yeah.
maybe you focus on your net worth because then once you get that to a point, you might be able to leverage that net worth and maybe substantially grow. And then the third part, and maybe this is down the road, but there's a tax problem, like you said. And I don't know if you have to worry about it in the beginning, but eventually you start to play this game in a way where you're on the defense to a certain degree. So, do you look at it the same way, cash flow and then potentially net worth and then potentially taxes, or am I missing a step there?
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. Although even in the early stages, if you're going to have some kind of business other than like being an author, so if you're going to have a retail business
Yep.
or
Most of our clients do, by the way. They have a business is tied to their book. Yeah.
yeah, in that case, you really want to do some planning early. Some of the things you can do very early may really pay off tax wise down the road. For example, like uh, putting stock in the names or of your children, or having partnerships where your children have get shares when they're worth very little, so there's hardly any tax implications early. But maybe 30 years down the road, when you're ready to cash out of the thing and maybe sell the whole business, then suddenly your estate plan has enabled your children to take a huge chunk of that without you having to gift it to them or possibly run into estate tax, which, as you may know, the estate tax exemption that doubled in 2017 is supposed to go back to where it was in 2026. So, but yeah, you're still talking about a pretty big estate there.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe
But
what is it, 10 million? I think it's 10 million, isn't that right?
yeah, well, with inflation, it'll be about 12 something when it
Yeah.
goes back. So it's a pretty big number. But with the kind of inflation we've got, uh,
Right. Yeah.
who knows? It may take $1 million to buy a loaf of bread the way we're going.
Oh, yeah,
uh,
that's definitely for sure. I'm seeing it.
so yeah, there are a lot of ideas I put into the book on things to consider when you're starting up and say, okay, how do I want to structure my ownership? And that's a big part of it, which can be very beneficial down the road. If you are using a corporation, there are things you can do like having uh, initially capitalizing it with debt, so that when you want to, you can have money coming out of the corporation tax-free instead of taking out dividends when the notes get paid off somewhere down the road when hopefully you become profitable and can do that.
So
Uh,
when
so
when
yeah,
it comes when it comes to the state by state comparison, I mean, I think we can all assume which is the most business friendly state, but is there one that maybe will shock us? Maybe there is one that's at the top of the list by far. So, is there one that's extremely business friendly that you would recommend if somebody's out there and they say, I can move anywhere and start a business? Where would you move?
well, I tell you, if you don't mind living in the boondocks, but that's probably not too surprising. But what Wyoming and South Dakota both, boy, there's hardly any taxes on anything.
South Dakota, I've heard that before. I didn't know
Yeah,
about Wyoming.
yeah. Wyoming actually has the highest per capita. If you just look at the per capita state taxes, they're one of the highest in the country. But people aren't actually paying that. Oh, the reason for that is because the state owns a lot of or receives a lot of oil company uh, taxes off of oil production and coal production, so that they generate so much income from that that a person living there, there's no state income tax, there's no corporate income tax, there's no estate tax. I mean, it's a real tax heaven, I should say. But
Wow.
South Dakota is also very similar, and
Interesting.
those are two of the better ones. Trying to think other than that, Florida, of course, is actually very good.
Yeah, I've heard of course, Florida. I would think Florida and Texas are the two that stand out. Maybe that's
Yeah,
changing, but yeah, I would think those are the two.
yeah. Texas does have a business tax that's kind of like an income tax, kind of like a sales tax, but it's computed three different ways, and you get to choose whichever one shows the lowest amount is the one you pay. But they basically have a little bit over $1 million exemption. So if you're a small business with under $1 million of revenue, you basically don't have to worry about the Texas tax. But it can kind of bite in if you're making big bucks.
Now, when it comes to operational procedure and doing things the right way, I realize that everything comes down to bookkeeping and record keeping, right? So I've talked to many tax professionals and they say, well, you know what? If you do X, Y, and Z and you keep track of the minutes, you have that to fall back on and you can use that to your advantage when it comes to tax time. When it comes to, let's just say, hosting an event at your house and you do it for X amount of time for the year, that's a great way to write off certain parts of your household, and they call it the Augusta rule. Have you heard of that? I'm assuming you have, the where you can rent out your house, I guess, either for your business or to other people for an X amount of time throughout the year. So these little strategies, when it comes to not just starting but operating your business in the most efficient way possible. Any recommendations, one, two, or three tips that you can share with us that are within your book?
Uh, Basically, just documenting everything, like business use of your car, keeping good records. I mean, it's kind of a pain in the neck, but if you do it,
You have leverage, right? Yes.
yeah, you maximize your tax write-offs. Those so many of the things like employee business expenses have been done away with, so you can't even do those anymore. But there are still a lot of things that do come under the general definition of business expenses, uh, such as use of your car, use of your home, uh,
Yep.
renting out a vacation home for less than 2 weeks a year. Uh,
Yeah. That's the Augusta rule, right? I believe that's it, right? Yeah.
yeah. I think that's what you're talking about there. But
Huh.
yeah, there are all kinds of little gimmies in the fringe benefits area too, and if if you have a pretty well going business, that has employees, and hopefully uh, you're generating a good bit of the income as an employee yourself. There, everything from medical reimbursement type plans, which were banned for a number of years, but they came back with some restrictions, but you can still do those if you do it right. All kinds of interesting little fringe benefits, like parking benefits. These are limited, but generally to like $250 a year or something like that. But you can do those for employees as well. Uh, Things like for bicycle commuting benefits. I mean, I kind of go through the whole list in the book. I have a whole chapter on fringe benefits. In addition to pension and profit sharing plans, which is one of the real biggies. That was one of the things I did. As soon as I started making serious money on the books, I set up a pension plan and a profit sharing plan for myself. And because I figured correctly that this good thing wouldn't last forever. So
It
I
lasted
was,
20 years, it sounds like. That's a pretty good start to it.
yeah, it lasted longer than I expected, and it was still booming when it died. But I was socking away every dollar I could up to the deductible limit every year, and that really saved my neck, because when the books went kaput, I really wasn't able to get another publisher, and even though I've self-published, I don't make any money on it. It's just more like a hobby now. But it was really good that I socked away all that money. Plus, when you're making your top dollars, all of those dollars going into the pension plans are coming off your top tax bracket. So pension and profit sharing plans are really, to me, still the best tax shelter out there for a business.
Yeah, could you just explain that real quick? I understand pension, but profit sharing, maybe people don't know the exactly how to what you're talking about there. So what
Yeah,
would somebody do, and what's the percentages and all that?
yeah. Now the standard thing, which is basically what I did, well, without getting too fancy, is to set up a pair of defined contribution plans, and you can do a 20, say a 15% plan and a 10% plan. The 10% would be a pension plan where you have committed to kick in 10% of your income, of your earned income every year, whether that's out of salary, or if you're self-employed, it's out of your self-employment income. And you don't want that to be, you could go all the way up to 25% on that, but you want to do that at 10%, because you're required to put in that money every year. And if for some reason you can't, you can get into trouble with penalties with the IRS, which is not a good thing. So you want to keep that fairly low in the 10%. The other 15% you're allowed to put in can be optional. It can be from a profit sharing plan, so that if you have enough profits each year, you may be able to put in up to 15% more of your income into the profit sharing plan. So altogether, you'd basically be putting in 25% of your income coming off the top. And that, that's a tax deduction, goes state and federal if you have a state income tax. Goes in there, compounds tax free until you get ready to retire and start taking it out, which is what I live on these days. My savings from the book sales 30 years
Wow.
ago, 20 years ago. Uh, and if you're making really big dollars, then you want to hire an actuary, because well, you'll need an accountant and an actuary, because you'll set up a defined benefit plan, and those you can sock away. Well, depending on how aggressive your actuary is, you may be able to put away $200,000-300,000 a year into a defined benefit plan, and that's basically what doctors, heart surgeons, people like that are doing, because
Gotcha.
that's the maximum bucks you can put away tax free.
So the pension and profit sharing plan, how much does that take to set up? And I guess what did it grow substantially? Was it not just a protection of have it being spent, but did it grow substantially because of it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's still a really big part of the consulting business or the tax business for tax accountants and lawyers, is setting these up. But you don't actually have to be one. I mean, it helps to have an accountant at least look at it. but there are IRS forms you can use to set up a simple, it's called SIMPLE plan, uh, and sock away. I forget the percentage right now. Uh, I forget if it's 15 or 20%. It's in the book, but those you can set up with no cost, literally. So when I set those up myself, I didn't have to do anything.
Wow.
Same thing if you have a brokerage account, which is often the best way to do it. Which is what I did. I had a Fidelity account, and I just downloaded Fidelity's forms, filled them out, sent them in, and started transferring money into the plans. That was all it took.
So
No
it
fees.
was a manual entry every month or every week or however you do it, right?
No, but that's what I do is wait till the end of each year. In fact, before I file my tax return, I'd figure out how much my profit was, and figure out how much I had to contribute and how much I wanted to contribute additional to the profit sharing plan.
Beautiful.
So it makes for a nice flexible situation.
So if somebody's out there listening to this and they're like, "Man, that's a great idea. Let me go do that." Do you recommend them go to their accountant and just say, "I would like to set up a profit sharing plan," and that accountant would know what they're doing?
Oh yeah. The accountant could do it for you as well. Now,
Beautiful.
if you wanted like a custom plan where you could borrow money from the plan, which some people do, which I rarely ever recommended unless somebody was, unless they really needed it for their business to stay alive, because you're kind of stealing your own retirement funds
Right.
because you have to pay it back at some point to the plan. Uh, but if you want those kind of plans, then you either have to hire an accountant or a benefit consulting. In fact, in most cases, I'd recommend a benefit consulting firm because they're much more knowledgeable than your average CPA about setting up the plans. But like I say, you can set up the simple form plans from basically any of the major brokerage firms just using their forms. They'll give them to you, and you're in business overnight
Wow.
with pension profit sharing plans, no cost at all.
The great idea because we've been talking a lot about the profit first technique. Have you ever read Mike Michalowicz's book Profit First?
Profit first? No, I can't say I have.
Okay, well, in his strategy, he talks about having multiple buckets prior, pay yourself first, pay your taxes first, pay your charity, whatever you're thinking about doing with your money, pay that first, and then look at the money left over and then become resourceful with that. And I thought that was so brilliant. So I set up multiple accounts. I really could see myself setting up a profit sharing
Oh,
account.
you bet. Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's a great recommendation. Have that as just part of the process. Nice and easy.
yeah. I have that pretty high up on the list because that was basically my approach. If I had money left over, then great, I'll go to Club Med or Hawaii or whatever. Which in those days I was doing about once a month. I mean, it was a great life for about 20 years there without too much work to do and a lot of income. So,
Wow. That's a
but
great nugget, guys. Hopefully you're listening, watching it live or paying attention to it or through Spotify. That's a great piece of advice. So set up a profit sharing account, get that going, and you could do it yourself for free, get an accountant. And like you said, just as long as you hit that mandatory minimum, that's all you got to watch out for, right?
yeah, yeah, it's nice. That money compounds a lot faster when you're not paying taxes on it either. Uh,
Yeah, it's the way to go. Very nice.
it's surprising how, and I'm not a particularly great investor, so it's done really well over the years. You're just by kind of doing the average type of investing.
We had an individual come on this podcast not long ago, probably 2 months ago, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, well, he was an investor for the top 250 richest people in the world or United States. He basically works with like the top 1%, 250 people, 250 richest families. And he says, you know what? We watched all the people who have tons of money and we managed their money for them. And what's really funny is that the people who just put their money into something and they systematized it without really changing anything throughout the years, are the ones who have done the best by far. It's not even close. So my recommendation is to invest like a dead man. And because the reality was the people who invested and then died actually had more money than the people who were trying to smart the market and try to move their money around. It was
Oh
if
yeah,
you just invest and consistently just do it like a machine in the same thing without moving it, you will win. And that
just
stuck with me.
just buy index funds. If you're not an investment genius, and
S&P 500. That's it, man. Right?
yeah, yeah, and all those fund managers that take huge fees for managing your money, about 95% of them can't match the performance of the S&P 500. It's almost hilarious.
Yeah. The only people who can beat the S&P are Warren Buffett and Nancy Pelosi. I think that's it. Those two.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If I could only find out what Nancy's going to do next, I'd be a rich man.
I like the way you think, man. All right, last piece of advice for anybody looking to start or operate their business the right way. Anything else you'd say other than pick up your book? Is there any recommendation that kind of sticks at the top of your head for anybody to pick up from?
Um, Not that I can think of, except in general, to think about the long term. Assume that you're going to do well in the long term, and do some of your structuring of your business pretty darn early, because the earlier you do it, usually the less tax complications there are. And once you've got things in place with a good plan, uh, and you probably have to work with an accountant or a lawyer to do that. But but if you plan early and the way you structure things, then those if you do hit the jackpot, it's going to be well protected. It's going to be going in the right places at the right time. So yeah, plan way ahead on plan on success, I guess I would say.
Beautiful.
And
And
you can do that without having to spend a fortune to do it. It's to do it while it's cheap.
you are a testament to the power of a book. Writing a book changed your life. I mean, really, it's unbelievable. But in your life, it
Oh
has
yeah,
completely changed everything. So, can you give a quick little, maybe a little shout out to how important it is to write a book? If anybody's listening on that there, I recommend it. It changed my life. It gave me a new identity. It helped me grow my business. So, what would you say to somebody who's thinking about writing a book?
uh, go for it. And it's really not hard to get it published on Kindle. That's all I'm doing right now is just on Kindle.
Absolutely.
And because I've got 50 books to try and put them into, trying to do print versions would not be feasible. And I'm hardly selling any. But if you got one book and you get it on Kindle and you market it, the sky's the limit. If you've got something that's really good that people want,
Damn right. Could change your
something
life.
wanted and needed.
You're living proof of that, man. Yeah. And then maybe
Yeah,
Costco will call you someday and say,
yeah,
"Hey, it's time to get it, put you in our stores." And that's, like you said, a spark that turns into an absolute blaze.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, great stuff. Is there a website or a social media channel that you're quite active that maybe people can reach out to you if they have questions? I don't know if you do this type of stuff consistently, but is there any way to reach you, or do you want people to reach you, or do you just want them to pick up your book?
Yeah, but both. In fact, they, if anyone's interested in the books, the quick way to find them is to go to my website, one of my websites, which is called Roninsoft, RONINSOFT.com. And when they get there, they'll notice it's basically about financial games that I publish. That's the other thing I do. I started writing real sophisticated financial game software about 35 years ago. So that's basically what I do now.
I read your bio on Amazon. I saw that. I was like, man, what is he? What does that even talk? What's he talking about? He's a software developer too. It seems like that's crazy.
Yeah, I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. But that's a website, and it has links to the different books if anybody wants to take a look at those as well.
I'm looking at it right now. RoninSoft.com. You can pull it up easy to find, and you gotta check out some of these games. You said you have gamified I guess, financial information, right?
Yeah, if I can talk about that a minute, it's my real pride and joy. I actually published it with my book publisher initially back in 1986 as a DOS program. So it's actually one of the oldest programs going. I've been updating it all these years, converted it to a Windows program when Windows came out. And it's a fun game. It's very realistic. Basically put everything I ever learned about law and taxes and politics and everything goes into it. Very realistic simulation, very addictive. And I've got customers, I think, in 120 countries, 121 countries now. So it's kind of a cult thing. It's not for everybody, but definitely a cult favorite. And I get all of these emails from people in places like the Philippines saying that, hey, I've been playing your game since I was 13, and I parlayed that into working. Now I'm a floor trader with Morgan Stanley in Shanghai, thanks to your game, what I'd learned from it. So it's real satisfying. I,
Yeah,
I get a real charge out of the game.
that's crazy. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah. So it seems like the stock market games center. And, if you've been doing it for this long and people are still following it and you keep it updated, that is awesome.
Yeah, it's a fun thing. I've kind of let the book things slide, except for updating them, and gotten into software, which I have no experience in, but I'm just a self-taught amateur programmer. But the program works, so people enjoy it.
Guys, check out roninsoft.com and his books. There are many of them on Amazon. Starting and operating a business, and then depending on which state you want to start in, it's available, easy to find. And man, what a wealth of knowledge. Obviously, a jack of all trades. Has been around law, finances, entrepreneurship, authorship. Very cool to talk with you. So thanks so much for being here, Mike. I really appreciate it,
Great
man.
talking to you, Mike. Take care. Thank you.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life.